we can stop the chit-chat between Councillor Hewitt and Barker, that'll be good. Welcome everybody here. Mr. Mohi, would you open our meeting for us, please?
Iho ka mātou ki a koe tēnei ata. Mana ki te ao mātou e hui ki te kōrero rero ngā me e whāna ki te whenua. Ki te mōna ngā ua o tēnei rohe o ngā tika ngunu whānui. O te tumanako o te ngāka aho ko te rereke o ngā whakaaro ki te tehi ki tehi. Ka taitarangi mai rei ki a mātou. O mai taka ki te tō mātou Chairman HBRC ki a whakaarahi a mātou ki rungi i te rā. Harahi pai. Koe nei mea ka pātai ki runga dingo e kore te aka ke amen.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any apologies? None. Apologies. Notices. Any notices? Councillor Dick?
Notices, no, sorry. General business.
I have one. The Central Hawke's Bay, they have a little action group around water storage, and they have asked to meet with councillors. I advised them that they should meet with a small group of councillors who were sceptic or not totally positive on the water storage scheme in particular. Does any other councillor wish to, who would like to attend such a meeting? Could I please have a raise of hands who would like to attend? You would? You would, councillor? It is tomorrow at 3:30, and it's the same 11:30 as that farm visit, so that makes it quite tight. But you can't attend tomorrow? So
I can't either.
You can't either?
I can't.
You can't? You can? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay.
Whereabouts at?
I'll tell you the location. It'll probably be at my home.
Oh, back here?
No, not here. At my home.
I mean back in this part of the district. I thought we were meeting down
they wish
there.
to come to us. Okay, no other notices? We don't have to approve notices. We have to. I'll just do it now. So item 2, any new conflict of interest declarations? There are none. So we'll move on. Confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting. I'm going to assume that they're all read. Are there any corrections?
And it should have been the 29th.
Oh, 29th March, yeah. Are there any corrections to the minutes? No corrections? Do we have a mover that the minutes are correct? Councillor Bevan. Seconder? I see people are quickly scouring through them. Do we have a seconder? Seconder. Councillor Balford. All those in favour? Aye. Minutes of the meeting the 29th are received. Just before we go, are there any other matters arising, matters in these minutes that people want to discuss that aren't on the agenda?
Sorry.
Are there any issues there in the minutes that are not on the agenda that you wish to raise? Under follow-ups.
Note under follow-ups number 2, and I'm sure you're going to go through them, but there's a field trip here for Tutera, and I'm pretty confident I recall several councillors requesting a Central Hawke's Bay field trip with some interest in visiting a feedlot, and I noticed that seems to have slipped out of the action list.
Yeah, sure.
That was actually arising out of Environment and Services Committee meeting, and so that is still on that follow-ups list, I believe.
And I recall that Maxwell was tasked with organising a date.
It is being progressed by Ian. It's on his list of to-dos.
Debbie, will you talk to Ian or will you talk to Tom? But you need to get involved in that, okay? So we agree with that. Any other follow-ups? I thought I saw another hand rise there, but that's not the case.
Oh, sorry, follow up.
Yes.
We've discussed a couple of times about developing a policy process for living wage for contractors and ethical investments, and I just wondered if it was appropriate that we kept that in the follow-ups to prompt us to actually go through that process.
Yeah. Do you have a thought on that, Greg?
Just as an aide-memoire, you mean? Yeah.
You want to follow up that and
Yeah,
really
want
precisely?
to make sure it's been
Yeah.
something's happening on it.
Yeah, that's in a Laguna request too, isn't it? Yeah, it was. Okay, so let's just follow that up. You want to make sure that the contractors that we're using are all...
Our advice at the last meeting was that all our staff will be being paid at or over the living wage, which is really cool.
Yeah.
But there was a question around contractors, and I think we concluded that there needs to be some sort of policy in place in terms of when we're looking at engaging contractors to make sure there's some clause in there about that. And I was under the understanding that there would be some sort of something coming back to us to say what that process should be, and it was along a similar vein about a policy about ethical investments. And I just wanted to make sure that we kept it at the forefront of our minds, and so that it should perhaps be going in the follow-ups from previous council meetings.
Okay.
Just on that vein, just through you to the Chief Executive, what would the contracts look like? I mean, are we that specific in any contracts with a contractor?
I imagine it would be the cleaning staff and, and various other sort of ancillary
Yeah.
things, rather than the, we don't really use any other external contractors that I'm aware of.
Pest control?
Pest control, yes.
I'm just asking the general question to the Chief Executive. How specific are our contracts? Do we go down to that level? I suspect we don't.
We don't do it, no.
Could I just make the point is that the request is for a policy position. What's being suggested
Yeah.
now is the answer. Do we or don't we? I just thought this would be something that we'd come back to later and say, well, on the basis of this is what the circumstances is. If you want to do this, X and Y. You've jumped two hurdles
steps.
down the track on this here, Fenton.
Yeah, and I do think it's very important. Those fruit growers and winery guys in Marlborough got badly caught with they didn't know that the contractors were underpaying, and yet they took the heat. So we need to know that our cleaning staff and all people that are contracted to us are paying a minimum wage at a very least.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm really concerned that parties such as May Chen pay the living wage as well.
Yeah.
So that should be out.
To herself.
No discrimination.
One of the follow-ups that I had, the HBRIC's review, we tabled it because we were going to join Hastings in a workshop, and my information is that we are not going to do that now. Do you have a thought on that?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I've had nothing to do with this. I can't answer that question.
Mr. Chairman, Napier City Council very sensibly have adopted.
Yeah, that's right, I see that.
So I had a query on this. Was it still to happen, and when and where? And I wasn't at the council meeting when this was debated, but if I had have been, I would have been saying, and I'll say it again now, that I'm disappointed that a very thorough and public process which has been undertaken has been singled out for contrary consideration when in fact there was every opportunity for people, including Councillor Bevan, to have made submissions to the review. However, having said that, if it's to occur, it won't do any harm. But given that one councillor has already adopted, then I'm not quite sure what you're going to achieve. Will someone let us know if it's going to happen and when?
Yeah, I think I'll talk to you about that and get on. And I think the workshop, Councillor Dick, was a really good idea because there was there was different schools of thought between Hastings councillors and the regional councillors, who are the ones that are most involved in this, because it's most of the Heritonga Plains, which are the issues around in the Hastings district. So I think it was and you were away, but it was the thought of councillors to get some kind of consensus between those two councils and so move forward together rather than scrapping each other in the paper. So that was the thought.
That's true, but you know, if that's the case, why bother setting up a review committee with representatives from each council and a thorough process? That's my opinion.
Yeah, because it wasn't thoroughly endorsed by some of the councillors on either side, I guess. But anyway, let's try and get that workshop going and follow this process through. I just had another item there myself too. Councillor Bailey, could you have a chat to the Greens bloke and just could save a lot of time, because you were deeply involved in the issue, the oil and gas issues, and might save a lot of time with our staff if you just had a bit of a chat to him.
And what would that be on, Chair?
Any exchange between PDENs.
Oh, okay.
And
Yep.
Lagoima.
Yep. Yep.
Just if you could just have a chat to him and say, you know, give your perspective to him, and staff can answer, but it just might help smooth the waters a bit.
I'm happy to do that, yeah.
Okay. We will, do we approve that? We do. So can we have someone just to approve that item? Business follow-ups. Can I have a mover? Thank you. Seconder? Thank you, Councillor. All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's carried. Call for items of business not on the agenda.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councillor.
General business, cycle safety.
Similar vein, I was just going to say health and safety.
Health and safety.
Two items, Chair. Discharges into the Ahuriri and feedlots.
Thank you.
Waihapua.
That should keep us busy.
Sorry, can you add the gravel? I'll just give you an update on the gravel meeting in Central Hawke's Bay last week as well.
Just on that, I must have slipped out of my diary. I don't recall having, it wasn't in my diary, that meeting. I might have attended that meeting.
Yeah, I was surprised you were there.
Don't know how I didn't know about it. Okay. If there are no other items on the agenda, we'll go straight to item 6. Feedback from HBRIC. Greg, are you taking us through this?
Yeah, the only changes from the document that was tabled at that last meeting is the references to the capital review. And that is paragraphs 11.2 and paragraph 12. where we decided,
Who's we, Greg?
where it was decided that if there were councillors that were thinking of taking direct ownership of the port back into the council, then one way of doing it was through the capital review and at least flagging it as a possible outcome of that review. Just one possible outcome.
I just make the observation that when you write 11.2 the way you have, it opens up to the uninitiated mind the possibility that it is not just the HBRC owning it, it could be anybody owning it. And hence we've got all of these placards all over Napier saying stop selling down the port.
And,
I think those placards came out before this was written.
I know, but this just adds to it. The point is that, well, it should say, if that's what the view is, it should capital addressing whether the ownership of the Port of Napier remains in HBRIC or would return to HBRC.
I also would like to know why you've only got one possible outcome of a review. I mean, a review is to come up with outcomes, not to predetermine any one.
It was to raise the issue. It had got into the public arena that the council was thinking of doing this or that or the next thing, or various councillors had thought about that. So it addressed that issue. I think that was why it was put in there, or why we put it in there.
Chairman, just through your question to the Chief Executive, on the basis of what you've said now, under whose authority did you go to the chairman of HBRIC and say that there is a possibility that the port will be coming back to the council? Because I know that conversation's taken place.
It was a suggestion made by the chair that I meet Sam Robinson because I hadn't met him, and that this subject came up, that there were councillors for various reasons that were looking at some form of more direct ownership by the council, and that I was going to address it, or a suggestion be made to address it through that capital review, and it was just giving him a heads
So
up.
which councillors are you talking about?
From this meeting,
Right.
whenever it was last.
Last month.
I realise that, but you...
Well, I wasn't part of that discussion.
And neither was Peter Bevan, so you shouldn't know anything either. How do... I'm just wondering how this conversation has got this far down the track, and we haven't even had the capital review.
We
Haven't even said it the terms.
We haven't had the capital review, but the capital review it was also suggested at that meeting that the wording of the capital review to include that as one possible item that needed to be looked at.
But it could be foreign ownership as well. I mean, you're preempting the discussion. That's a concern I have.
Well, in fact, Chair, if I could just intercede, if you look at...
Point of order, Chair. He has no right to intercede. I asked a question, I expect an answer.
Just pause. I think it does clearly say, Councillor, that one outcome might be, and everybody knows that that could be one outcome. It could be a lot of others too. It could be all sorts of outcomes.
But why have that written then? And I have...
It's probably...
There's no point of order, Councillor Curtin.
Yeah, it's
Cease and
Not for
desist.
you to say whether there's
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
offended, settle down.
Just
Point of order.
Just hold. I mean, it's probably not that it shouldn't be written like that. But I don't think it's offensive because, after all, we know that one of our councillors did put that fairly on the table. So it's definitely a possible outcome.
Well, no, it doesn't, but
Chair,
I'll bring it up again later. This is another view.
If I could point out for the benefit of Councillor Wilson, if you look at recommendations 3, it makes it absolutely crystal clear that what's being considered is either retained ownership through HBRIC or directly by the HBRC, and that's exactly what we're discussing, and I don't know why we're even having this conversation.
On the same line, I have another question. Why have we got anything to do with the capital review structure being amended in an SOI discussion? That's for Greg.
I might have to pass that question on to Liz.
No?
I'm happy to
I've
answer it,
never-
Mr Chair. if you're
Prepared the
here
paper.
to-
I've asked the Chief Executive.
I'd quite like to answer it, Mr Chair.
Yeah, I think I would like the Chair of the Corporate Services to answer that question. Councillor?
No, thank you, Mr Chair. Happy to. And instead of splitting hairs, councillors making their comments might reflect on what the SOI actually does. It sends a signal to the HBRIC board as to what potential changes might be coming down the road. That's what an SOI does, Councillor Wilson. It sends some signals as a request from HBRIC for council to indicate potential directions of travel. And this is what that does. It's serving the purpose for which an SOI is intended. So I'm really perplexed as to why councillors are so troubled in this regard.
Chair, an SOI is a negotiated position between the two entities. Full stop. Not an indicator.
I think we are splitting hairs there. I think we do need to move on. Obviously, this is a sensitive issue. The wording may be slightly wrong, as Councillor Barker has pointed out, and sent some signals to our community which are not really right. But it does add to the discussion. There is a big discussion on our port and how we know that our port is going to have to expand to meet demand, and how we fund that, whether we do it off our own balance sheet or whether we introduce new capital, is a decision for the capital review team. And I think councillors have a right to express their views before that. I mean, that team will do it independently, and that will be binding. Well, actually, it won't be binding because it'll come back to council.
Mr Chairman.
Yes, I'll come back to you, Alan.
Well, just to comment on that last point, it seems to me that you made an important point there. It's coming back to the council, and when I read this, my concern was that the rationale for where the lines of the reporting lines are, as to whether it's directly through HBRIC or directly to this council, raises accountability issues that a lot of people have concerns about, as to whether by having layers of institutions here, we have too attenuated the responsiveness and accountability of the port. And so, from my standpoint, the ultimate resolution of this is not simply a question for a capital review. That is one major factor, whether the advantages, disadvantages of this or that sort of ownership. But there's also a question of accountability to the public through us, and what structure might best facilitate that. And that's not a call that a capital review group should make. It's a call that we should make as a council. So, but obviously that all of that would land in our laps anyway. So on that basis, I really don't have a problem with the recommendations as they stand. I don't read this as getting into how were we to finance the port. This recommendation simply was addressing, is the line of reporting to be through HBRIC or directly to the council? That's the only issue. I thought this was aimed at signaling, if you will.
Mr Chairman, I just wonder whether in fact this is a bit premature, because all of this stuff is inextricably bound up with whatever decision this council makes about Ruataniwha, or what the Supreme Court makes perhaps. Because if it doesn't go ahead, then HBRIC's portfolio is limited, or would be limited at the moment, to the port. And at that stage, it would be, I would say, it would be desirable to have that discussion or that debate as to whether not so much that the port reports direct to the regional council, but whether in fact there is a need for an investment company, full stop. If it's simply going to be a shell organisation with virtually no portfolio, then why should it exist? Now, I'm not saying what my position hypothetically would be if these things transpire, but I think that the Ruatanawha decision has got to be very much fundamentally in the mix of any of this sort of consideration, and I actually think it's a little premature.
My question, Chair, was around recommendation 1.3 and the ability again of HBRIC to continue to borrow for working capital purposes, and whether the figure of 5% is too generous given the situation that we're in at the moment. I'm not entirely sure what level the borrowings of HBRIC are at the moment in terms of their capital or the value, but given that HBRIC is currently in high, it's suffering from a moratorium, then I'll be intrigued to know how much further working capital purposes is required for the next period.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? And then we will move the motion, and then we'll have go into discussion on it. Are there any other questions or issues? Do you want to pull that out? Or
Are either of the directors here able to enlighten me on that? Just, it only needs just a rough. It doesn't have to be an exact answer.
This was a deal which we did with them some time ago, and I guess just a continuation of that same arrangement. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, well, my argument would be with that, Chair, would be that the situation's changed with HBRIC from when that deal was originally made. So we have an opportunity to change the deal, but I'm just not sure as to how necessary it is. But that's I stand to be corrected on that.
Perhaps if I can just say, Chair, HBRIC currently has a loan facility of $6 million. And that loan facility was put in place to enable it to repay loans that it had received from HBRC, because it was cheaper for HBRIC to borrow the money directly than to borrow it with the extra margin that HBRC was putting on that loan funding. And I can't tell you, maybe Councillor Hewitt can, I can't tell you how much of that $6 million has been drawn down to repay the council, but I think it's a fair percentage of it, from memory.
Okay, so
We have a mover. You want to move all three together?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Please.
You want to take them separately?
That's fine.
Okay, you're fine. Second, and we'll take it. So we take 1-1. We'll move that separately. You're moving that. We'll keep the same movers. Yeah. Seconders. Do you wish to speak on 1-1, Councillor?
When you say 1-1, are we talking? You're wanting?
I'd quite like to take. I know I've just been advised here, but I'd quite like to, given Councillor Bailey's issue with this one, I'd quite like to take them separately and vote on them separately.
So you mean 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, Mr. Chair, or
well,
1, 2, and 3?
Ah, yes, yeah, 1, 2, and 3. Yeah.
I think it's 1, 2, and 3. Otherwise,
1, 2, and 3.
Have a vote for
yeah, 1, 2, and 3.
So you're putting 1.
Number 1, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, all up together, and 2 and 3. You're fine with that?
Yep.
We have a mover and a seconder. Do we have any further discussion? I have one point, just on top of what Councillor Dick said. If I just roughly looking at the numbers, so the port roughly is net net value, market value of 250 million. We have another 80 million, so that's 320. So just take out 20 of that, and you have 360. That's the 60,000. You have you end up with 320 if you just take the 60 which you've got in cash. Our return on investment on that is 3.8%. So it's not doing too great at the moment. That's my one comment. Do we have any other comments? So we're moving resolution 1. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? It's carried. You happy to move 2 again?
Yes, we're very happy with it, Mr. Chair.
2,
And I'd like to speak to it. Yes. Mr. Chair, recommendation 2 sends a very clear signal to the HBRIC board that one of the things that ought to be considered in their 2017-18 year is the potential for the Port of Napier to be directly accountable to Council itself. Mr. Chair, I feel that this is a critical step for a couple of reasons. The first is that over a significant period now, the port itself has been removed from the direct democratic direction of the council and has been passed on to non-elected parties as in what I might be described as somewhat of a plaything for those directors. And it's led to a situation where a perception is held that the port itself is somehow closely linked to the outcomes of the Ruataniwha Dam scheme. Now that's an unfortunate scenario to be held. The dam itself should stand on its own with no impact whatsoever on the port, and the councillors will be fully aware throughout the election process of the concerns expressed by the public about the impacts that the port has, or the impact that the dams, the return of a dam scheme would have on the port. I think we need to allay those concerns. The other critical thing is that the port itself, undertaking its major recapitalisation, ought to be, that to me, Mr. Chair, is very much a shareholder issue. It ought to be discussed, considered and thoroughly examined by the council itself as opposed to its intermediary. And I'm very concerned that we do not end up in a situation where we are receiving third hand the deliberations around that. So I'm very keen to see that we at least examine this issue and make sure that the port itself, the discussions around that are retained by council and not devolved to unelected persons. So there are those key concerns that ought to be those issues need to be raised with the board, a message sent to them that that's what we're potentially looking to do, and this recommendation does that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The recommendation doesn't actually do that. The recommendation says one outcome of that might be. So it doesn't.
Well, that may be so, Mr. Chair, but this is debate, and I'm giving you my opinion in debate.
I'm just saying the resolution doesn't say that.
Well, it doesn't do that, but it certainly opens the door for it.
Okay. No, we have a seconder. Who was the seconder?
I'm the seconder.
Oh, you were, Councillor.
Okay, can I just say that I'm going to vote for this resolution, but no one should take that to mean that I will vote automatically for the port to come back under the direct control of this council. I think there is a discussion to be had about the future of HBRIC. I think there's lots of opportunities it could be doing, there's lots of things it's done, and I think it's a time for us to review it. I agree with Councillor Dick in that if the port shares come back to this council, that would leave the HBRIC with very little to do, and I think that would be in many regards a loss. I think what we've suffered with HBRIC is it's been focused entirely on the Ruatanifis scheme, and we have not done a number of other things which I think opportunities would have presented itself. So I would have us to have a thorough discussion about it, and that may be one of the outcomes, but it's not an automatic outcome, and my voting for it is to reaffirm. It does not mean that I'll be voting automatically for the port shares to come back to HBRC.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bailey.
I would like to propose an amendment to the motion, simply because I think that having those words, that one outcome of that review, is going to open up a can of worms in terms of a change of ownership in the port, not only from directing the reporting lines back to the council direct, but other ownership structures. And I don't think that's the purpose of that's the intent.
Point of order,
of
Chair.
this.
Just not trying to be obstructive, but Councillor Bailey needs to put his motion up, have it seconded, then he can tell us why.
Fair enough.
Okay, yeah,
Fair enough.
let's do that.
So my suggested wording is that we change the words, and that one outcome of the review might be direct ownership of the Napier Port by HBRC to with a view that the review will direct ownership of Napier Port by HBRC.
Why don't you just put a full stop after Napier Port
That's true.
and stop predetermining?
Yeah.
I might even be convinced to vote for it if that was the case.
I still think that leaves us open for the public to come back and say we are actually looking at privatisation of the port.
Well,
it's preempting that discussion. I think it needs to be very clear that, I mean, perhaps I've got my wording wrong, but I think it needs to be very clear that we're only, and this, for the purpose of the statement of intent, we're only looking at bringing the port back under reporting to the council rather than to HBRIC.
Could we say somehow, someone put this words, that the review is looking at the capital structure of the Napier Port in its entirety? Doesn't meet your...
The full stop will achieve that.
I think taking out the word ownership might be... because they're not just looking at ownership, they're looking at the capital structure. I mean, they might decide to do it off the balance sheet.
So that's fine, no?
I think we can be oversensitive about signs around the place, Mr. Chairman. I mean, that Member of Parliament is well qualified in business, and he knows himself that if there's an issue about capitalisation of the port, then something has to be done, and it doesn't include selling the port. There are a number of other options. So we've been played with politically on this, and I just don't think we should fall into the trap of...
If it's not falling into a trap, it's just wording it so that it is correctly worded.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I could speak to that, if it is helpful to put a full stop after Napier Port, I'm quite comfortable with that. It doesn't materially change the recommendation.
Okay, are you happy with a full stop after Napier Port?
That's the first port, isn't it? Not the second port.
Yeah, the first port.
Do we have more than one port? Do we have more than one port?
Oh, you never know.
I'm still uncomfortable with it, and it's just yeah.
Mr. Bale, you don't have a secondary then.
I know, but that's what I'll do.
May I move an amendment, therefore?
Yeah, you don't have a seconder.
I would move that we put a full stop after Napier Port, the first Napier Port, as an amendment.
And you'll second that.
I'll second it.
So we have a mover and a seconder. Okay, anyone want to talk to that? You're not entirely happy with that, but I tend to agree that this will fuel a few rumours.
Yeah, I'd talk in favour of that, Chair. If Councillor Curtin thinks back to when he voted in favour of the port becoming owned by HBRIC all those years ago, the argument hasn't changed. And
he's disputing that assertion.
in fact, if
if I didn't think it would offend him, I would say his commentary was a nonsense, but it will offend him, so I will not say that.
So you didn't say that. Oh, that's good. Strike that from the record. Hey, we have a move and a second. Anyone else want to talk to that? So we now have a full stop after examine ownership of the port.
Does the next sentence start at the end?
No, it doesn't. Move and a second.
I'll just make one quick comment on that. I'll be voting against that simply because I do not think the wording is clear enough, but that's the only reason. I'm quite happy to have the discussion about the port coming back to being under control, under reporting back to the council.
Mr. Chairman, I think the wording is delightfully ambiguous. And because ownership could be referring to the reporting relationship. Is it simply an issue of reporting relationship, or is it an issue of capital structure? The implication would be, if it's part of a review of capital structure, it's going to include the whole shebang. The public is now under the expectation that that, in fact, is what is on the table, and that's what we're looking at. So we might as well, acknowledge the fact.
We have a mover and a seconder. I wish to speak to it too, because I understand what Councillor Bailey is getting to, and there is a lot of sensitivity about that we will be discussing ownership, selling the port, and I think the public need to be reassured. I'm sure Sophie will do that for me. That any decision on this will come back to this council. That this is a issue that the council, the public's elected representatives will make. That the review just makes recommendations to this council. So it should be very clear on that. If there's no other speakers, I'm going to put the item. The amendment to be to that the full stop that it ends at Napier Port. First one. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Thank you. Need division. All those in favour? I think. Yeah, put the amendment. Yeah. All those in favour? Against? One against. Okay, item 3.
You need to put the substantive
I'll put
motion.
the substantive motion. Okay, so we want to move the substantive motion.
Well, Mr. Chair, have we finished the debate on it?
I thought we had.
I haven't had my reply, and
Okay.
there were issues raised in debate that need a
Okay,
reply.
you'll get your reply. Okay.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, in concluding the debate, I would like to point out to some of the councillors who raised some issues in debate. Councillor Wilson, for example, raised the issue of a prior vote of mine on this issue. He may recall that debate, casting his mind back some 6 years, that in fact I did support HBRIC, so the Port of Napier coming into HBRIC at the time when all councillors were to be appointed to the HBRIC board. Quite a different scenario, and he may recall my discussion at the time, my significant protest that council
Point of order, Chair, that's incorrect.
were linked to...
That is absolutely incorrect.
Mr. Chair...
There was never going to be 9 councillors.
Mr. Chairman, this is debate. We can say and have opinions without point of order.
I love the debate.
Mr. Chair, I would point out also that this is well worthy of a review and consideration both by HBRIC and by the review, because one of the issues that does need to be focused on and raised by Councillor Dick is the purpose of HBRIC if the port were to be removed. And I'm not giving up the issue of water storage at all. I think it's an important issue, needs to be considered by the HBRIC board going forward. And I think it's important that their focus ought to be on that significant issue of water and water storage in the region, as opposed to solely focusing on the port, which is a danger when it becomes such a focal point for it. I think water and storage is important for the region, and I hope the HBRIC board do, and we have the proper expertise and focus by them on issues of water as opposed to issues of port.
Councillor. I'll give you right a reply at Smoko, Councillor Wilson. Okay, so we're moving to substantive motion, recommendation 2. These are very serious issues. So all those in favour? Aye. Against, and division. All those in favour, please raise their hand. And against. Councillor Bailey will be recorded, and
Sorry, Councillor Bevan, were you going to vote?
I'm abstaining from all of these.
oh, I didn't notice that. So, do you want to abstain as well?
I didn't vote on the number 1, but I was happy to vote on the second two.
Did you record a
No,
abstain?
didn't vote. You didn't ask, but I think it's done.
Oh, okay.
Same as Peter.
Well, I think we might record an abstention on all of those. Then you are you. Yeah, and you, Debbie, abstention on all. I think we
Number
should.
1.
Oh, yeah, we should record that. Okay, so we're moving to number 3, Councillor.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just think the wording there is pretty woolly. Amends the HBRC Capital Structure Review Advisory Committee. I assume that's what it's talking about. And rather than scope and process, is it not terms of reference? That's a question. And second question is, are there terms of reference for that committee? I'll ask that question again when we get to the item, but for clarification at this stage.
I answered. I got the naming of the parts, if you like, from the previous document that was tabled at the previous meeting. So that's where I got the name from.
But it is the Capital Structure Review Advisory Committee that we're talking about, is it?
The document.
Can you read that out?
So
Wait, we'll just
the
re-answer
actual wording of the document itself is called the Capital Structure Review Scope and Process Document, as resolved at the 29th of March meeting.
It was resolved in March, was it?
Yeah, on the 29th of March. And it just says, agrees the scope of a review as outlined above, subject to any input from HBRIC Limited.
And
And then there's a further recommendation to form the Capital Structure Review Advisory Committee, which is a separate, is the committee that will oversee the structure review.
Oh, well, I'll go back on my old agendas and see what it says.
That is the old agenda.
I do agree with
Minutes.
Councillor Dick. It should be the Capital Structure Scope and Process document, is it?
Is that what you want?
Oh, of course, there's the hyphen.
Is this not, should this just not be in agenda item 9? Has it not fallen into the wrong agenda item?
I thought that the first part of the discussion was about questions. We're on to debate.
Yeah, yeah.
We've now had extremely
No, but we had to tidy up that just bit of that confusion from Councillor Dick, because it does say, it is correct what it says. Are there any other questions? You think it should be
This
in
is
the...
an SOI discussion we're having, so I would have thought this should have been in agenda item 9,
yeah.
not here at all.
You're right.
Councillor Curtin, do you have a view on this?
Well, I tend to agree that it's misplaced in SOI discussion. It's really not something we need to have considered by the by HBRIC itself, is it really?
So can we simply defer this item till that and add it if it is approved at the...
So I've just been advised that doesn't matter where it goes, it is a council resolution, so you can move it if you wish, or you can deal with it right now in this paper.
Well, I'd suggested the decision, for whether that happens or not, rests with the mover and the seconder. It's our motion.
No, that's exactly right.
And I would-
How do you want to
I
hand?
just make the point to the mover. The seconder is entirely happy with that to happen.
To move it.
Refer it to outline, to it's in a tidy place, same debate.
Well, I'm certainly happy to concur with my colleague that that's a good thing to do, Mr Chair.
Okay.
All right.
Right. Well, we're done with it. We're done with it. Councillor Barker told me I've got to move the meeting along. He wants to get away.
Why don't we just move to that agenda item while we're heads are around this particular issue?
9. I
Why
think that's
don't we
a
have
good
a
idea.
rest from it to clear our heads?
No, we'll go to item 7. Come on, we'll go to item 7.